I told the agents they had the wrong person, but they kept insisting I was in witness protection. 2 federal agents walked into my office Wednesday morning and flashed badges. Evan Kane, you need to come with us right now. My coworkers went silent. Janet from accounting started crying. My boss Rick turned pale and nodded at me like he understood something I didn't. There's a mistake, I said. I'm not whoever you're looking for. The lead agent stepped closer. Your cover is blown. We're moving you immediately. What cover? I'm a software engineer. I've worked here 5 years. She looked at her partner. Sir, your wife knows. We need to leave now. I pulled out my phone to call my wife Savannah. The agent's hand shot toward me. No calls. Not until we're secure. Everyone stared at me like they'd never see me again. Rick mouthed good luck as they walked me out. In the elevator, I tried Savannah anyway. Straight to voicemail. The agents tensed but didn't stop me. I tried again. Voicemail. The agents put me in a black SUV. We drove 20 minutes in silence to a house I didn't recognize. Inside, 3 more agents were waiting. The lead agent finally spoke. Mr. Kane, I'm Agent Maddox, U.S. Marshals Service. Your identity has been compromised. They opened a laptop, showed me security footage of someone walking into a courthouse. The person looked exactly like me. That's not me, I said. Agent Maddox showed another photo, the same person on a witness stand. My face, my build, everything. Chicago Courthouse, February 2022. You testified against the Volkov crime family. I've never been to Chicago. I was working in Seattle that whole month. She opened a folder. Papers with my name on them. My social security number. My signature. You witnessed a murder. You testified. We gave you a new identity and moved you to Seattle. Someone leaked your location to the mob. I called Savannah again. Still voicemail. I checked our home security camera on my phone. The house was empty. Her car was gone. Where's my wife? Safe location. She's been moved. I checked my bank account. Frozen. Everything frozen. You can't do this. I didn't witness anything. She showed me more photos. Me in meetings with FBI agents. Me signing legal documents. Me in safe houses. Except none of it was me. But it looked exactly like me. Then she showed me the case file. A man named Volkov shooting someone in an alley. Pages of testimony. My testimony. Describing what I saw. This is insane. I can prove I was at work in Seattle during February 2022. Call my boss. We already did. Your company shows you took 2 weeks personal leave that month. I pulled up my work calendar on my phone. February 2022. 2 weeks blocked off. Personal leave. I didn't remember taking any leave. I'd worked straight through that month. Someone stole my identity. That's not me in those photos. My phone finally rang. Savannah. I answered before anyone could stop me. What's happening? They took me to some government building. I don't know. They think I'm someone else. Silence. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. They told me about your brother. What brother? I'm an only child. Her voice shook. No, you're not. You have a twin brother. Your parents never told you. I sat down hard. That's impossible. Your parents just called me. They're flying to Seattle right now. Your mom wouldn't stop apologizing. I looked at Agent Maddox. I have a twin brother? She nodded. You didn't know. Savannah kept talking. His name is Evan, too. Same name as you. He's the one who witnessed the murder. He testified against the mob. 3 years ago, the marshals put him in witness protection and gave him your identity. Your real identity. Your social security number. Your life. My hands went numb. Why would they do that? Your parents gave you both up for adoption when you were babies. Different families. Your brother's family kept in touch with your birth parents. You didn't. When your brother needed to disappear, the marshals asked your birth parents for help. They told them about you. About how you'd built a stable life in Seattle with no connection to them. The perfect identity to borrow. Agent Maddox stepped forward. Your brother lived as you in Chicago. Used your name, your social security number, everything. We thought it was the perfect cover. 2 men, same name, same face, one hiding in plain sight. Where is he now? He disappeared 2 days ago. Ran from his protection team. We think the mob found his location. Savannah's voice cracked. They can't tell you apart. The mob thinks you're him. That's why your office, your house, everything is compromised. They're looking for the witness and they found you instead. I sat there holding the phone, staring at Agent Maddox. My twin brother had been living as me for 3 years and I never knew. Now the mob was hunting both of us and couldn't tell us apart. Agent Maddox handed me a different phone. Your brother is out there somewhere, probably thinking like you because he's been pretending to be you. We need to find him before they do, because whoever they find first dies. I took the phone. My hands were shaking. Somewhere out there was a stranger with my face, and we were both being hunted. Agent Maddox pulled a chair across from me and opened a thick folder on the coffee table. She tapped the new phone screen and pulled up a photo of a man who looked exactly like me, standing in front of a Chicago apartment building. Your brother's name is Dawson Neely. she said. He's been living as Evan Kane in Chicago for 3 years. After he testified against Vicente Volkov's crime family in February 2022, we needed to give him a new identity fast. The Volkovs put a price on his head within 48 hours of the verdict. I stared at the photo. Same hairline, same jaw, same build. How did you get my identity? I asked. She flipped through more pages. Your birth mother Marianne contacted us. She knew about you, knew you'd built a stable life in Seattle with no connection to your biological family. We thought it was perfect. 2 identical men, same name, living separate lives. No one would connect you. I grabbed the new phone and tried calling Savannah. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. My chest got tight. Where is she? Agent Maddox checked her watch. We moved her to a secure location 3 hours ago. She's safe, but we're limiting communications until we understand how the Volkovs found Dawson's location. I need to talk to my wife right now, I said. She nodded and pulled out her own phone, made a call, spoke quietly to someone. 2 minutes later, my new phone rang with a blocked number. I answered and heard Savannah crying. Evan, what's happening? Is any of this real? Her voice cracked. Did you know about him? About Dawson? I swear I didn't know, I said. I'm as confused as you are. This is insane. They told me you have a twin brother, she said. They told me he's been pretending to be you. How do I know you're really you? Because I love you, I said. Because we got married at that tiny chapel in Portland, and you wore your grandmother's ring. Because you hate mushrooms and you sing off key in the shower. I'm me, Savannah. I'm your husband. She was quiet for a long time. They said we might have to leave Seattle. Leave everything. We'll get through this, I told her. I promise. We'll figure this out together. Agent Maddox made a gesture, and I knew I had to end the call. I told Savannah I loved her and hung up. My hands were shaking. A man in a dark suit walked into the safe house carrying a laptop and another thick folder. Agent Maddox introduced him as the technical analyst. He sat down and opened the laptop, pulling up file after file. Dawson Neely grew up in foster care in Detroit, he said, clicking through documents. Rough childhood. Multiple placements. He was working as a delivery driver in Chicago when he witnessed a Volkov family execution in an alley off West Division Street. February 14th, 2022, Valentine's Day. He showed me crime scene photos. A man dead on the ground, blood on the brick walls. Dawson saw Vicente Volkov himself pull the trigger, the analyst continued. He called 911 from a payphone 2 blocks away. His testimony put 3 Volkov family members in prison, including Vicente's brother. That made Dawson the family's #1 target. I looked at more photos of Dawson. In one, he was sitting at a coffee shop. In another, he was walking down a Chicago street. Every photo looked like me, but his eyes had something different in them, something harder. Something that came from seeing a man get shot in an alley. Agent Maddox slid a document across the table. Dawson has been living in a Chicago apartment under your name. We set up a fake job for him at a tech company. He used your social security number for everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, driver's license. As far as any database knew, Evan Kane lived in both Seattle and Chicago. The violation made me sick. Someone had been using my name, my identity, my entire life as a cover while I had no idea. How could you do this without asking me? I said. Agent Maddox looked uncomfortable. Your birth mother Marianne reached out to us when we needed a cover identity for Dawson. She told us about you. About how you'd been adopted by a different family, built a good life in Seattle, had no connection to your biological relatives. You were perfect, clean background, stable job, no criminal record. We thought you'd never know because Dawson would stay in Chicago and you'd stay in Seattle. But you never asked my permission, I said. We couldn't risk it, she said. If we'd contacted you, it would have created a connection between you and Dawson. The whole point was that you were separate people who happened to share the same name and face. No one would think to look for that. I wanted to punch something. Instead, I asked, why did Dawson run? Agent Maddox pulled out a handwritten note in a plastic evidence bag. He left this for his protection team 2 days ago. He claimed someone inside the Marshal Service was leaking information. Said he overheard his handler on the phone discussing his location with someone who wasn't law enforcement. Then he disappeared before we could check his story. I read the note through the plastic. The handwriting looked like mine. Someone inside is dirty, the note said. They know where I am. I have to run. I'm sorry. The second marshal who'd been standing by the door brought in a tablet and set it on the table. This is from Dawson's last known location, he said, pressing play on a video file. The footage showed a dark apartment hallway. A door opened and Dawson walked out carrying a backpack. He looked directly at the camera mounted above the door. His lips moved and I could read what he said. I'm sorry. Then he walked down the hallway and out of frame. The timestamp read 3:04 a.m. That was 48 hours ago, Agent Maddox said. We've had 0 contact since. No phone calls and no credit card use and no ATM withdrawals. He vanished completely. I watched the footage again. Dawson moved like me. Walked like me. Even the way he adjusted the backpack on his shoulder was exactly what I would do. If he's been living as me, he knows everything about my life, I said. Agent Maddox nodded. He had access to your social media accounts, your employment records, your address, your wife's information. Everything public about you was part of his cover story. He studied you for 3 years to maintain the identity. The thought of someone studying my life, learning my habits, knowing my routines made my skin crawl. He knew where I worked, where I lived, what I did on weekends. He'd been watching me from Chicago while pretending to be me. My new phone rang, Savannah's number. I answered and heard her crying again. He called me, she said. Who called you? Dawson, your brother. He called my cell phone an hour before the marshals showed up at our house. My stomach dropped. What did he say? He said, I'm sorry for what I did to your husband, Savannah said through tears. Then he hung up. I thought it was a prank call, some weird scammer. But it was him. It was your twin brother, and he called me directly. Agent Maddox grabbed the phone from my hand and called someone on her team. She rattled off instructions about tracing the call while I sat there trying to process everything. A tech guy rushed in with a laptop 3 minutes later and plugged it into their system. He typed fast and pulled up cell tower data while Agent Maddox stood behind him watching the screen. The tech guy pointed at a map showing red dots scattered across the northwest. He zoomed in on one particular tower in western Washington state. The call had pinged off that tower about 2 hours ago. Agent Maddox studied the map and said Dawson was somewhere in Washington, probably heading towards Seattle. My stomach twisted knowing he was coming here to my city. He knew where I lived and worked. He knew my routines and my favorite places. The realization made my hands shake. Agent Maddox handed me Dawson's case file and told me to look through it carefully. I opened the thick folder and started reading. The first page showed his basic information with my name on it. I flipped through pages of documents and statements. Then I saw his college transcripts. Same degree I had, computer science from the same university. I kept reading and found employment records showing the same technical skills I listed on my resume. There was a handwritten statement in the middle of the file. I stared at the writing. It looked exactly like mine. Same slant, same loops on the letters. Even the way he crossed his T's matched. Agent Maddox saw me staring at the handwriting and explained they had coached him for months. They taught him to copy my speech patterns and mannerisms. They made him watch videos of me from my social media. They studied how I walked and talked. He spent 3 years pretending to be me so well that even people who knew me wouldn't notice anything wrong. The violation of it made me sick. The technical analyst pulled up another laptop and logged into some federal database. He showed me Dawson's digital footprint from the past 6 months. There were ATM withdrawals from different locations around Chicago, small purchases at gas stations and convenience stores, online searches that the marshals had been monitoring. I leaned closer to see the search history. Dawson had been researching Seattle for weeks. He looked up my neighborhood on Google Maps. He searched for my office building address. He even found the coffee shop I went to every morning and looked at their menu. The analyst scrolled through more searches showing Discovery Park, Pike Place Market, and the waterfront. Dawson had been planning this trip for at least a month. Agent Maddox pulled out photos from another folder and spread them on the table. 3 men with hard faces stared back at me from the pictures. She said these were Volkov family enforcers who had been spotted in Chicago 2 days ago asking questions about Dawson. They were showing his photo around and offering money for information. The lead enforcer was Vicente Volkov himself, the brother of the man Dawson testified against. Vicente had put a serious bounty on Dawson's head. Agent Maddox said they wanted revenge, not just to silence him. They wanted him dead as payback for putting their family members in prison. I looked at the photos again and felt cold. These men were hunting my brother and they thought I was him. I told Agent Maddox I wanted to help find Dawson before the Volkov family did. She shook her head and said it was too dangerous. I argued that I knew Seattle better than anyone on her team. I knew the places someone would hide and the routes they would take. She still looked doubtful, so I pushed harder. I said Dawson and I were identical twins, which meant we had the same brain chemistry. We would think alike and solve problems the same way. If anyone could predict where he would go, it was me. Agent Maddox stared at me for a long moment, then made a phone call. She gave someone instructions about protection details and secure protocols. She hung up and said I could help, but I had to follow strict rules. I couldn't go anywhere without agents. I had to stay in constant contact. I had to report everything I thought or noticed. 20 minutes later, a woman walked into the safe house looking exhausted. Agent Maddox introduced her as Marshal Liz, who had been Dawson's handler before he disappeared. Liz had dark circles under her eyes and kept apologizing. She said she should have taken Dawson's concerns more seriously. She should have investigated his claims about a leak right away, instead of dismissing them. Now he was out there alone and in danger because she hadn't listened. I asked Liz what Dawson was like as a person. She sat down and described him as paranoid but smart. He had major trust issues from growing up in foster care. He questioned everything and always had backup plans. But he was also loyal to the few people he cared about. That's why he called Savannah to warn her. Liz thought he ran to protect people, not just to save himself. I asked what scared Dawson the most. Liz said his biggest fear was trapped with no way out. He always rented apartments with multiple exits. He carried cash everywhere. He had escape plans for every situation they put him in. She said he would never go anywhere he couldn't leave quickly. That information clicked something in my brain. Agent Maddox spread out a map of Seattle on the table, showing all the locations Dawson had searched online. I started crossing off places he wouldn't actually go. My house was too obvious. My office was too public. The coffee shop had only one exit. Then I saw it, a storage facility near the waterfront. I had rented a unit there 2 years ago and barely ever used it. I realized Dawson would have access to all my email accounts and financial records as part of his cover identity. He would know about that storage unit. It was perfect for him, anonymous and secure, multiple ways in and out, and it had everything he would need. I kept camping gear there and a sleeping bag. There was an old toolbox with some emergency cash I had stashed away. Agent Maddox immediately called her team and gave them the storage facility address. She sent 4 agents to check it out right away. I paced the safe house while we waited for the team to call back about the storage unit. My phone rang 15 minutes later, and I saw Savannah's number on the screen. I answered, and she asked when she could come home. Her voice sounded tired and scared. I told her it wasn't safe yet, that Dawson was somewhere in Seattle and the mob was hunting him. She started crying and said she just wanted her normal life back, wanted to sleep in our bed and go to work and stop being afraid. I promised her we would get through this even though I had no idea how. I told her I loved her, and we would be together soon. She hung up without saying it back. Agent Maddox's phone buzzed and she stepped into the other room to take the call. She came back 3 minutes later with one of the agents from the team. He opened his laptop and showed us security footage from the storage facility. The timestamp said yesterday at 2 in the afternoon. A man who looked exactly like me walked up to my unit and punched in the access code. He went inside for 8 minutes, then came out carrying a backpack that looked full. The agent pulled up the facility's inventory system and showed that my unit had been accessed using my code. Someone had taken the camping gear, the sleeping bag, and the old toolbox where I kept about $500 in emergency cash. Dawson had been there, and now he was equipped to stay hidden outdoors if he needed to. Marshal Liz leaned forward and studied the footage. She said Dawson always preferred to stay mobile and have options. He would use the camping gear to avoid hotels and motels where someone might recognize him. Agent Maddox's phone rang again, and her face went completely white as she listened. She hung up and told us a man matching Dawson's description had been spotted by Volkov enforcers near Pike Place Market 2 hours ago. They chased him through the crowds but lost him near the waterfront. The mob was in Seattle now and actively hunting. My stomach dropped and I felt sick knowing the Volkov enforcers couldn't tell Dawson and me apart. That meant I was in just as much danger as my brother. Agent Maddox confirmed this and said we needed to move to a more secure location immediately because the safe house we were in might already be compromised. She started making calls to arrange the transfer. The technical analyst was still working on his laptop in the corner, and he suddenly said he found something disturbing in Dawson's digital trail. He turned the screen so we could see. Dawson had been accessing dark web forums used by people in witness protection. The search history showed he was asking questions about corrupt marshals and how to disappear completely without government help. He had been planning his escape for weeks, maybe longer. The post went back almost 2 months. Marshal Liz looked devastated reading through the forum posts. She kept saying she should have noticed something was wrong, should have paid more attention to his behavior. Agent Maddox told 2 agents to start packing our equipment and files. We were moving within the hour. She called her supervisor and explained the situation while we loaded everything into black SUVs parked in the garage. We drove across town to a different safe house in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. This one was bigger and had more security features. Agent Maddox's supervisor arrived 30 minutes after we did. He was an older man with gray hair who introduced himself as Deputy Marshal Carson. He and Agent Maddox spread out Dawson's complete case file on the dining room table. They started reviewing everyone who had access to his location, his protection details, and his case information. Marshal Liz, 3 other marshals, 2 FBI agents, the technical support team, and several administrative staff at the Chicago field office. The list was longer than anyone wanted to admit. Deputy Carson said they would investigate everyone systematically, but it would take time. I spent that night in a bedroom at the new safe house trying to think like Dawson. I put myself in his shoes. He was scared and alone and didn't trust the people who were supposed to protect him. He witnessed a murder and testified against dangerous criminals. The marshals gave him my identity, and he lived as me for 3 years. Then someone leaked his location and he ran. He came to Seattle because it was my territory, my city, my life. That meant he might be planning to contact me directly. The question was when and how. I barely slept and kept thinking about the storage unit and Pike Place Market. He was moving around the city using my knowledge of Seattle. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Agent Maddox holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. She said it arrived at the safe house with no return address and no postage. Someone had hand-delivered it during the night. The security cameras showed a courier service dropping it off at 4 a.m. She opened it carefully while wearing gloves. Inside was a burner phone with a single contact saved in the directory. The contact name was Brother. She handed me the phone and said Dawson wanted to talk to me directly, twin to twin. I stared at the phone for a full minute before I pressed the call button. It rang twice, and then I heard my own voice answer. The sound of hearing myself speak from outside my head was the most bizarre thing I had ever experienced. Dawson said, "Hey, Evan, I guess it's time we finally met." His tone was both apologetic and desperate. He said he knew I must hate him for stealing my identity and putting me in danger. I told him I didn't hate him, but I needed to understand what was happening. He said he wanted to meet face-to-face and alone in 2 hours at Discovery Park. He gave me specific coordinates for an overlook point on the north side. Then he hung up before I could respond. Agent Maddox immediately said absolutely not. There was no way she was letting me meet Dawson alone. She said it could be a trap, or the mob could be watching and waiting. But I argued that Dawson wouldn't show up if he saw federal agents. This might be our only chance to bring him in safely before the Volkov enforcers found him. We went back and forth for 10 minutes. Finally, we reached a compromise. I would wear a wire so they could hear everything. They would maintain distant surveillance but stay out of sight. If anything went wrong, they would move in immediately. Agent Maddox fitted me with a small microphone that clipped inside my shirt collar. She tested it 3 times to make sure the signal was clear. Then she assigned 4 agents to surveillance positions around the park. I had 90 minutes before the meeting, and I used the time to study maps of Discovery Park on my phone. The overlook point Dawson chose had multiple escape routes through the forest trails. He had picked it carefully. Marshal Liz pulled me aside before I left and said to be careful because Dawson was smart and paranoid. She said he might test me somehow to make sure I came alone. I needed to be ready for anything. I drove to Discovery Park with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The wire under my shirt felt like it was burning into my skin. Agent Maddox's voice came through my earpiece telling me the surveillance team was in position around the overlook point. I parked in the lot and walked up the trail, scanning every face I passed. None of them were mine. The overlook had a view of Puget Sound and the mountains beyond, but I couldn't focus on any of it. I checked my phone. 2 minutes until the meeting time Dawson had specified. Then 5 minutes passed. Then 10. A jogger ran by and I jumped, thinking for a second it might be him. It wasn't. 15 minutes. 20. My heart was pounding, so hard I could hear it in my ears. Agent Maddox's voice crackled in my earpiece asking if I saw anything. I whispered no. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe the mob found him already. Maybe this whole thing was a setup. Then I saw movement on the trail below the overlook. A man walking up toward me, same height as me, same build, same walk. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a jacket, but as he got closer I could see his face. My face. It was like watching a recording of myself. Every step he took matched how I moved. The way his shoulders shifted, the way he held his hands. Everything. He stopped about 10 feet away from me and we just stood there staring at each other. Nobody else was around. The wind came off the water and made noise in the trees. Dawson looked terrible. His face was thinner than mine, with dark circles under his eyes that made him look sick. His eyes had this haunted look that I'd been seeing in my own mirror the past few days. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then closed it again. Finally he spoke, and hearing my own voice come from someone else made my stomach turn. He said he was sorry for stealing my life, but he didn't have a choice. The marshals told him I'd never know. His voice cracked on the last word. I told him I wasn't here to judge him. We were both in danger and needed to work together. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. He said the marshals couldn't protect us because someone inside was feeding information to the mob. He'd been tracking communications for weeks and found evidence his location was leaked on purpose. I felt Agent Maddox tense through the earpiece. Dawson pulled out his phone with shaking hands and started swiping through screenshots. He turned it toward me, and I saw encrypted messages between someone using a Marshal Service IP address and a contact labeled only as V Associate. The messages talked about Chicago, about protection schedules, about a witness who testified against the family. One message made my blood go cold. It said the twin in Seattle doesn't know anything but might be useful for drawing out the target. They were talking about me. Someone in the Marshals had been selling us both out. I opened my mouth to respond, but Dawson's eyes suddenly went huge. He screamed, "Get down," and lunged toward me. The sound of gunshots cracked through the air before I could process what was happening. Dawson slammed into me and we both went down behind a concrete barrier as bullets hit the railing where I'd been standing. More gunshots came from different directions, Agent Maddox's surveillance team returning fire. I pressed myself against the concrete with my heart trying to punch through my ribs. Dawson was right next to me, breathing hard. More shots, someone screaming, the sound of running footsteps. Dawson grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt and pulled me toward a small trail that led down into the trees. We ran. Bullets hit tree trunks around us, sending splinters flying. I could hear Agent Maddox's team engaging the shooters behind us, their voices yelling commands I couldn't make out over the noise. Dawson knew exactly where he was going, pulling me down paths I didn't know existed. More gunshots, but farther away now. Sirens started wailing in the distance. We kept running until the trees got so thick I couldn't see the overlook anymore. Dawson finally stopped at what looked like a drainage tunnel entrance built into the hillside. We crawled inside, both of us breathing so hard I thought I might throw up. The tunnel was dark and smelled like wet concrete and rust. We sat there in the dirt trying to catch our breath. Dawson looked at me with dirt streaked across his face and said, "Now did I believe him? Someone told the mob exactly where we'd be." I realized he was right. Only Agent Maddox and her immediate team knew about this meeting. One of them had to be the leak. The wire under my shirt was still working. I could hear Agent Maddox's frantic voice asking if I was okay, demanding I respond. I pressed the mic and told her we were safe, but going dark for a while. She started yelling that I needed to return immediately, that this was not negotiable. I reached under my shirt and ripped the wire out before she could trace the signal. Dawson already had both our phones out. He smashed them against the concrete floor of the tunnel until they were in pieces. He said we needed to disappear until we figured out who the leak was. No phones, no contact with the marshals, no going to any place they knew about. We crawled out of the tunnel and started making our way through the forest toward the residential streets on the other side of the park. We kept to backyards and alleys, moving fast but trying not to look like we were running. A bus stop appeared and we got on the next bus that came, sitting in the back with our heads down. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I watched Dawson and noticed how we moved the same way. When I shifted in my seat, he shifted the same direction a second later. When he scratched his jaw, I realized I'd been about to do the same thing. We got off the bus downtown and switched to the light rail, then to another bus heading south. The whole time we moved together like we'd practiced it. We didn't talk, but we didn't need to. When I turned left down a street, he was already turning. When he stopped at a corner to check for surveillance, I was doing the same thing. After an hour of moving through the city, Dawson finally spoke. He said, "I guess being identical twins means something after all." His voice was quiet and weird, like he was realizing something important. I knew exactly what he meant. We weren't just two people who looked the same. We thought the same way, reacted the same way, made the same choices in the same situations. I had an idea where to go, a place nobody knew about, not even Savannah. 3 years ago, I won a cabin and a poker game from a guy who needed cash fast. It was an hour outside Seattle, off the grid, no paper trail connecting it to me. I'd been there twice to check on it, but never told anyone. It was the perfect place to hide. I started leading us toward a car rental place where we could get a vehicle with cash. Dawson followed without me explaining where we were going. When we got to the rental place and I told him about the cabin, he smiled for the first time. He said that's exactly the kind of hidden resource he would have kept secret too. The cabin was the perfect backup plan. We got a rental car using fake IDs Dawson had in his backpack and drove out of the city as the sun started setting. Neither of us talked much during the drive. We were both too busy watching the mirrors for anyone following us. The cabin was small and isolated, surrounded by trees with no neighbors in sight. We went inside, and Dawson immediately started checking all the windows and exits. I did the same thing without thinking about it. When we finished, we looked at each other, and I felt this weird connection I'd never experienced before. We were more alike than I wanted to admit, way more alike than I was comfortable with. And now we were stuck together, hiding from the mob and from the people who were supposed to protect us. Dawson went straight to his backpack and pulled out a laptop and 3 manila folders stuffed with papers. He spread everything across the cabin's small kitchen table and opened the first folder. Inside were printed bank statements with highlighted sections showing wire transfers. He pointed to a name at the top, Marshall Liz Chamberlain. The transfers came from something called Westport Holdings LLC, amounts ranging from $5,000 to $20,000, deposited monthly for the past 3 years. He pulled up a document on his laptop showing Westport Holdings was registered to an address in Chicago that matched a known Volkov family business front. The connection was right there in black and white. Liz had been taking money from the people hunting us. I stared at the evidence and felt my stomach turn. Dawson opened the second folder and showed me phone records. Liz's personal cell had made over 200 calls to a number registered to someone named Anton Petrov. He pulled up another document showing Anton was Vicente Volkov's second cousin and handled family business on the East Coast. The calls happened at weird times, late at night and early morning, and they got more frequent right before witnesses under Liz's protection got killed. He had a spreadsheet tracking it all. 3 witnesses dead in 5 years, all under Liz's supervision. 2 weeks before each death, her call frequency to Anton's number spiked. The pattern was clear and awful. Dawson said he started noticing things 2 months ago when Liz took a call during one of their check-ins and stepped outside. He heard her through the window saying coordinates that matched his safe house location. That's when he started digging. He used my software engineering skills, the ones he learned while pretending to be me, to track her digital footprint. He found the shell company payments, traced the phone records, connected the dots between dead witnesses and suspicious timing. The evidence was solid and detailed. Every transaction had a date, every phone call had a timestamp, every connection had documentation. I kept looking through the papers and felt this weird mix of horror and respect. Liz had seemed so genuine when she talked about Dawson at the safe house. She acted worried and guilty, like she cared about his safety. But Dawson explained that's exactly how she operated. She played the concerned handler while feeding information to the mob. She built trust so witnesses would tell her everything, then she sold that information to the people hunting them. The Caring Act was part of her system. 3 other people trusted her and died because of it. Now we were targets 4 and 5. We spent the next 4 hours going through everything and building a timeline. Dawson had tracking software on his laptop that showed financial connections between Volkov family businesses and various shell companies. One of those companies paid Liz. He had communication logs showing patterns of information flow. He had maps showing where witnesses died compared to where Liz claimed they were relocated. Everything pointed to systematic betrayal. I realized Dawson was brilliant at this kind of work. He thought like me because he'd been living as me, using my analytical brain to solve problems. We worked together naturally, finishing each other's sentences and seeing the same patterns in the data. He'd pull up a spreadsheet and I'd immediately spot the outlier. I'd suggest a connection and he'd already have the file open. We made a good team despite everything he'd done to me. The sun started setting and we took a break. Dawson made coffee and we sat at the table surrounded by evidence of corruption. He started talking about his life in a quiet voice. The foster homes were bad, he said. Some families just wanted the check. Others were worse. He moved around Detroit for 16 years, never staying anywhere long enough to feel safe. Then he witnessed Vicente Volkov shoot someone in an alley behind a restaurant. He was walking home from his job at a warehouse and saw the whole thing. The victim begging, the gun, the body dropping. Vicente saw him too. Dawson ran and called the cops, but he knew his life was over either way. Either the mob would kill him, or he'd spend his life looking over his shoulder. The FBI offered him witness protection after he testified. They said they'd give him a new identity and a fresh start. That's when the marshals brought in our birth mother, and she told them about me. About my stable life in Seattle, my job, my wife, my clean record. They said I was the perfect cover because we were identical, and I had no connection to the family or to Dawson. They promised him he could become someone who had a real life, someone people loved, someone with a future. He took it because it felt like his only chance. When I asked why he contacted Savannah before running, his eyes got wet. He said he couldn't let her think I'd abandoned her or done something wrong. He'd been living my life for 3 years and reading my emails and seeing my photos and learning about my relationship. He saw how much Savannah and I loved each other. Despite stealing my identity, he started feeling protective of my life and the people in it. He wanted her to know something was wrong, that the man she loved was in danger. He wanted her to be careful. The emotion in his voice was real. We sat there in silence for a while. 2 identical men with completely different lives, stuck together by circumstances neither of us chose. Then we started planning. The evidence against Liz was solid, but we needed to expose her without getting killed by Volkov's people. Dawson suggested using our identical appearance as a weapon instead of a liability. If we could make the mob and the corrupt marshals think we were in 2 places at once, we could gather more evidence while staying alive. We could create confusion about which twin was where, make them chase shadows while we built an airtight case. The plan started taking shape. We needed to bring Agent Maddox in because her reaction at the park shooting was genuine shock. She wasn't part of the corruption, but we needed proof so solid she couldn't ignore it or dismiss it. Something that would force her to act immediately. Dawson suggested we set a trap for Liz. Feed her false information and watch where it went. Catch her in the act of leaking to the Volkovs, then take everything to Maddox at once. The next morning, we drove back towards Seattle, and I found a payphone near a gas station. Dawson waited in the car while I called Maddox's direct number using a calling card. She answered on the second ring and her voice was sharp. I told her I needed to meet urgently and had evidence about the leak Dawson mentioned. She demanded to know where I'd been and why I went dark. I said I couldn't explain over the phone, but I had proof about who was compromised. She went quiet for a long moment. Then she asked if Dawson was with me. I said yes, and that we both needed her help, but she had to come alone. She couldn't tell anyone, especially not Liz. Maddox was silent again, then said she'd been having her own suspicions about Liz but needed proof. She agreed to meet in 2 hours at a coffee shop downtown on 3rd Avenue. I gave her the address and hung up before the call could be traced. Dawson and I drove to the coffee shop early, and he took a position across the street where he could watch through the window. I went inside and got a table in the back corner with a view of the entrance. My heart pounded while I waited. If this was a trap, if Maddox brought other marshals, or if Liz showed up, we were finished. But I had to trust someone eventually. Maddox walked in exactly on time wearing jeans and a jacket instead of her usual professional clothes. She scanned the room and spotted me, then walked over and sat down without ordering anything. Her face was tight with stress. I pulled out copies of the evidence Dawson had collected and spread them on the table between us. The bank statements showing Liz's payments from Volkov shell companies. The phone records showing her calls to Anton Petrov. The timeline connecting dead witnesses to spikes in her communication with mob associates. The financial trail linking Westport Holdings to known Volkov businesses. Maddox's face changed as she looked through the papers. First, she was skeptical, scanning the documents like she expected to find problems. Then her expression shifted to concentration as she started seeing the connections. Her jaw got tight. Her hands gripped the papers harder. By the time she reached the timeline showing 3 dead witnesses, her face had gone pale. She looked up at me with something like horror in her eyes. She said she'd suspected something was wrong with Liz's cases but never had proof. She'd noticed the pattern of bad outcomes, but Liz always had explanations. Witnesses who panicked and broke protocol, unfortunate coincidences, bad luck. But this evidence showed it wasn't luck at all. It was systematic betrayal for money. Maddox's hands shook slightly as she organized the papers into a stack. She asked where Dawson was, and I gestured toward the window. He was standing across the street watching us. She stared at him for a moment, then back at me, and I saw her process just how identical we really were. She said this was the most disturbing case she'd ever worked. Not just the corruption, but the fact that we were interchangeable targets. The mob couldn't tell us apart, so we were both marked for death. She needed to bring this to her supervisors immediately and get internal affairs involved. She asked if we'd come in with her right now, both of us, under her personal protection. I looked out the window at Dawson and he gave a small nod. We were done running. It was time to fight back with the truth. Agent Maddox spread the papers out on the table and studied them for another minute. Her finger traced the timeline connecting the dead witnesses to spikes in phone activity. She tapped one date hard. She said she'd noticed problems with cases under certain handlers, but never had solid proof. Internal affairs needed evidence like this, not just gut feelings and bad luck stories. She looked up at me and asked where my brother was right now. I glanced toward the window and made a small gesture with my head. Dawson was standing across the street next to a bus stop, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. He saw my signal and started walking toward the coffee shop entrance. Agent Maddox watched him approach through the window, and her whole body went tense. The door opened and Dawson walked in, scanning the room before his eyes found us in the back corner. He came over and sat down in the empty chair, and Agent Maddox stared at both of us like she was seeing double. She said this was the most disturbing thing she'd ever witnessed in her career. Sitting across from two identical men who were both targets of a mob hit made her skin crawl. Dawson leaned forward and started explaining the plan we'd worked out at the cabin. I would go back into protective custody and act like I was cooperating fully. Liz would think she still had control of the situation. We'd feed her false information about Dawson's location, little bits of intel that sounded believable. If she was really the leak, she'd pass that information to the mob. Agent Maddox could monitor all her communications and catch her in the act. I added that we needed concrete proof of her betrayal, something that would hold up in court and convince internal affairs. Dawson said he had the financial records and phone logs, but we needed to catch her actively leaking information. That would seal the case. Agent Maddox looked between us and said the plan was risky but could work. She asked what happened if Liz got suspicious, or if the mob figured out the false information was a trap. Dawson said that's why I had to sell it convincingly. I had to act scared and cooperative, like someone who just wanted protection and didn't suspect anything. Agent Maddox picked up her phone and made a call. She spoke quietly for a minute, then hung up and told us she was bringing in 2 other marshals she trusted completely. She also wanted FBI involvement since this touched organized crime and corruption of federal officers. The operation was getting bigger and more complex, but it gave us better odds of success. She said we'd need surveillance teams, communication monitoring, and coordination between agencies. Dawson asked how soon we could start, and Agent Maddox said we'd move today. Every hour we waited gave the mob more time to find us. She told me to come with her back to the safe house where Liz was stationed. Dawson would stay hidden at a location only Agent Maddox knew about. We'd start feeding false information immediately and see how fast it leaked out. The safe house was a different one than before, in a quiet neighborhood with normal-looking houses on both sides. Agent Maddox pulled into the driveway, and we went inside through the garage. Liz was in the living room working on a laptop, and she jumped up when she saw me. She rushed over asking if I was okay, where I'd been, what happened at the park. Her concern looked real, but I kept thinking about those bank statements showing payments from mob shell companies. I told her I ran when the shooting started and hid in the woods for hours. I said I was scared and didn't know who to trust. Liz put her hand on my shoulder and said I was safe now, that they'd protect me. She asked if I'd seen Dawson or had any contact with him. I shook my head and said I hadn't heard from my brother since the phone call days ago. I could see her watching my face, trying to figure out if I was lying. Agent Maddox stepped in and said we needed to debrief about the shooting and figure out next steps. Over the next 2 days, I stayed at the safe house with Liz and another marshal I didn't know. Agent Maddox came and went, bringing updates and asking questions. I made sure to mention things casually, like I'd heard Dawson might be hiding at a motel in Tacoma. I said a friend thought they saw someone who looked like me near there. Liz asked lots of questions about which motel, what friend, when they saw him. I gave her enough details to make it sound real, but not so much that it seemed planned. The next day, I mentioned that Dawson had a friend in Bellingham who might let him hide out. I said I remembered him talking about this friend years ago, someone from his time in Chicago. Liz wrote everything down and asked for the friend's name and address. I made up a name and a street that sounded believable. On the 3rd day, I said I'd been thinking about places Dawson might go, and there was a campground near the Canadian border where we used to camp as kids. That was a lie since we'd never met before this week, but Liz didn't know that. She seemed really interested in the campground location and asked me to mark it on a map. Agent Maddox had teams monitoring all of Liz's phone calls, emails, and text messages. She told me later that within 2 hours of me mentioning the Tacoma motel, Liz made an encrypted call that the FBI traced to a number used by mob associates. The same thing happened with the Bellingham address and the campground. Every piece of false information I gave Liz leaked out almost immediately. The FBI set up surveillance at all 3 locations I'd mentioned. At the Tacoma motel, 2 men showed up asking the front desk about someone matching Dawson's description. They had guns and looked exactly like the kind of people who worked for crime families. FBI agents photographed them and ran their faces through databases. Both men had connections to the organization. The trap was working perfectly. Agent Maddox came to the safe house on the 4th day with FBI agents behind her. Liz was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee when they walked in. Agent Maddox read her the charges, and Liz's face went completely white. She stood up fast and said there must be some mistake. She was running her own investigation into the leaks. The FBI agent in charge pulled out printed copies of her phone records and bank statements. He showed her the encrypted calls to mob associates and the payments from shell companies. He showed her the timeline of witnesses dying after being under her protection. Liz tried to argue, but her voice was shaking. She said she could explain everything, that it wasn't what it looked like. Agent Maddox looked sick as she watched them put handcuffs on Liz. She told Liz she'd trusted her for years, and Liz had been selling out witnesses the whole time. Liz didn't say anything else as they walked her out to the waiting cars. I stood there watching and felt weird about it. This woman had been ready to let me die to protect her deal with the mob. Agent Maddox drove me to FBI headquarters downtown. We went up to the 5th floor where Dawson was waiting in a conference room with a bunch of agents and lawyers. Seeing him again after days apart was still strange, like looking at myself from outside my body. The FBI agent in charge explained they were building a huge case against the crime family. Liz's communications gave them evidence of witness tampering, conspiracy to commit murder, and corruption of federal officers. They could use it to go after the whole organization. Dawson's original testimony about the murder was now even more important because it showed the pattern of the family trying to silence witnesses. They wanted both of us to testify again, this time about the corruption and the attempts on our lives. The lead FBI agent was a woman who looked tired and serious. She said they could offer us both real witness protection with new identities. Not the fake kind where someone steals your life, but actual new names and backgrounds in different cities. She explained we couldn't go back to our old lives because we were still targets. Even with some family members in prison, others would want revenge. I asked about Savannah, and the agent said she could come into protection with me if she chose to. They'd give us new identities together and relocate us somewhere safe. I'd have to leave my job, my house, my friends, everything I'd built in Seattle. Dawson would have to do the same, giving up whatever life he'd tried to build in Chicago. The agent said we'd be separated, living in different cities under different names. We could have limited contact through secure channels, but couldn't see each other regularly. It was the only way to keep us both alive. I sat there thinking about everything I'd lose and everything I'd already lost. My identity had been stolen years ago, and I never knew it. Now I had to give up what was left of my real identity to survive. Dawson looked at me across the table, and I could see he was thinking the same thing. We'd both been running from different things our whole lives, and now we were running together towards something new. The FBI agent gave me a secure phone, and I stepped into a private office to call Savannah. My hands shook as I dialed, and she answered on the first ring. I explained everything in a rush. The corruption, the trap, how we caught the marshal selling us out, the arrests, the prosecutions coming. She stayed quiet on the other end for what felt like forever. Then she asked what happens next, and I told her the truth, that the FBI wanted to put us both in witness protection with new identities in a new city. She'd have to leave everything behind, her job, her friends, her whole life in Seattle. I asked if she wanted to do that, or if she wanted to stay and rebuild without me. The silence stretched out again, and I could hear her breathing on the line. Finally, she said something that made my chest loosen up for the first time in days. She told me she married me for better or worse, and this definitely qualified as worse, but she wasn't leaving me. The relief hit me so hard I had to sit down. I told her I loved her and we'd get through this together. She said she knew we would and asked when she could see me. I looked through the office window at the FBI agents and lawyers still talking with Dawson and told her soon, maybe tomorrow if they cleared it. She said okay, and that she'd be ready for whatever came next. We hung up, and I sat there for a minute just breathing before going back to the conference room. The next day, Agent Maddox arranged for Savannah to come to a secure FBI facility across town. They brought her in through an underground garage and up a service elevator to a windowless meeting room on the 3rd floor. I got there first and waited by the door, nervous about seeing her after everything that happened. When she walked in, her eyes went straight to me and she crossed the room fast. We held each other for a long time without talking, and I could feel her shaking. She pulled back and looked at my face like she was checking to make sure it was really me. Then the door opened again, and Dawson came in with 2 FBI agents. Savannah's face went completely white when she saw him. She took a step back and grabbed my arm hard. Dawson stopped just inside the doorway, and I watched my wife stare at my twin brother for the first time. She kept looking back and forth between us like her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. Agent Maddox explained that Dawson wanted to apologize in person and asked if Savannah was okay with that. She nodded slowly but didn't let go of my arm. Dawson came closer and stopped a few feet away. He told Savannah he was sorry for stealing my identity and for putting both of us in danger. He said he understood if she hated him and that he'd spend the rest of his life trying to make it right somehow. Savannah stared at him for another long moment. Then she said she didn't forgive him for what he did, but she understood he was trying to survive. She told him that didn't make it okay, but she got why he made the choices he made. Dawson thanked her and said he knew he didn't deserve her understanding. The FBI agent suggested we all sit down and talk about the next steps for witness protection. 2 days later, the FBI brought in our birth mother for questioning. Agent Maddox came to get Dawson and me from the secure apartment where they were keeping us and drove us downtown to the federal building. She explained that our mother had been cooperative and wanted to see us both. We took the elevator up to the 8th floor and walked into an interview room where a woman was sitting at a metal table with her lawyer. When she looked up and saw us walk in together, her face crumpled and she started crying. I stared at her and felt weird because I could see myself and Dawson in her features, like looking at an older version of both of us mixed together. She had the same eyes, the same jawline, the same way of holding her shoulders. She stood up fast and took a step toward us, but the FBI agent with her put a hand out to stop her. She apologized over and over, saying she never meant for any of this to happen. She told us she thought she was helping Dawson survive and never imagined it would put me in danger. Her voice broke on the words and she kept wiping her eyes. Dawson moved closer to the table and I followed. The FBI agents asked us to sit down so they could conduct the formal interview. Our mother, Mary Ann, sat back down and twisted her hands together on the table. She looked at both of us like she was trying to memorize our faces and kept saying she was so sorry. The FBI agent running the interview asked Mary Ann to explain her involvement in the identity theft from the beginning. She took a shaky breath and started talking. She said she gave both Dawson and me up for adoption when we were 3 days old because she was 17 and couldn't take care of twins. Her parents had kicked her out and she had nowhere to go. She placed us with different families through an adoption agency and tried to move on with her life. She stayed in contact with Dawson's adoptive parents through letters and occasional visits, but lost track of my adoptive family completely. They moved out of state when I was 2 and she never heard from them again. She said she thought about us every day, but figured we were better off without her. Then 3 years ago, the U.S. Marshals contacted her. They explained that Dawson had witnessed a murder and needed to disappear into witness protection. They asked if she knew anything about his family history that could help create a cover identity. That's when she told them about me, about how she'd given birth to identical twins, and one of them had built a stable life somewhere with no connection to her or Dawson. The Marshals asked for my information, and she gave them everything she knew: my name, my approximate age, the city where my adoptive parents had lived. She said she thought I'd never know, and that it would save Dawson's life. The FBI agent asked if she understood she was helping commit identity theft, and she nodded. She said she knew it was wrong, but Dawson was her son, and he was going to die if she didn't help. I stood up fast and my chair scraped against the floor. I told Mary Ann she had no right to make that choice without asking me first. She destroyed my life to save Dawson's and never even considered what that would do to me. Dawson stood up too and said she saved his life, and he'd be dead right now if she hadn't helped. I turned on him and said that didn't give either of them the right to steal my identity. Mary Ann cried harder and said she took full responsibility for everything. I told her and Dawson both that family doesn't mean you get to make decisions that destroy someone else's life. Just because we share DNA doesn't give anyone permission to use me like that. Dawson argued that he didn't have a choice and neither did she. I shot back that there's always a choice and they chose to sacrifice me to save him. The FBI agents tried to calm everyone down, but I kept going. I told Mary Ann that she gave us both up when we were babies and that was her choice too. She didn't get to come back decades later and decide which son was worth protecting at the expense of the other. She sobbed and said she'd live with the guilt forever and that she understood if we never wanted to see her again. Dawson put his hand on my shoulder and I shrugged it off. The room went quiet except for Mary Ann crying. Agent Maddox suggested we take a break and continue this later when everyone had calmed down. I walked out without looking back. Over the following weeks, the FBI built their case while Dawson and I stayed in protective custody at a safe house in the suburbs. We had separate bedrooms but shared the common areas and spent most days together with nothing to do except wait. At first, we barely talked, both of us processing everything that happened. Then slowly, we started having real conversations. Dawson told me about growing up in foster care, bouncing between homes, never feeling like he belonged anywhere. I told him about my adoptive parents, my normal childhood, how I never knew anything was missing until all this happened. We compared notes about our lives and found weird similarities. We both liked the same foods, had the same nervous habits, even laughed the same way. We talked about our childhoods, our dreams, what we wanted out of life before everything went crazy. Dawson admitted he'd been jealous of me when the Marshals first told him about my stable life in Seattle. He said it felt unfair that I got the good family and the normal life while he got shuffled through the system. I told him I understood that anger, but it didn't justify what he did. He agreed and said he'd spend the rest of his life trying to make it up to me somehow. We played cards, watched TV, cooked meals together in the safe house kitchen. The FBI agents guarding us said it was strange watching us interact because we moved and talked so similarly. Despite everything, despite the anger and the betrayal and the stolen identity, we were developing a real relationship. Not just as genetic copies, but as actual brothers who were starting to understand each other. 6 weeks after the arrests, Agent Maddox came to the safe house with news. The FBI had successfully prosecuted 3 members of the crime family, including the main enforcer who'd been hunting us. And they used the evidence from the corrupt marshal's communications, combined with Dawson's original testimony about the murder. The family's operations in Chicago were dismantled, and most of their leadership was going to prison for decades. The immediate threat to both of us was eliminated, though Agent Maddox warned that some lower-level associates were still out there and might want revenge eventually. She said the prosecution sent a clear message that witness tampering and corruption wouldn't be tolerated. Dawson asked about the corrupt marshal, and Agent Maddox said she was facing federal charges and would likely spend 15 years in prison. The investigation had uncovered 2 other witnesses she'd betrayed over the past 5 years. I felt sick thinking about how many lives she'd destroyed for money. Agent Maddox sat down at the kitchen table with us and explained what came next. We couldn't go back to our old lives even with the main threats eliminated. Too many people knew our faces and our connection to the case. We needed to enter the witness protection program properly this time, with full security protocols and new identities in different cities. Agent Maddox spent the next 2 weeks processing our transition into witness protection. This time, everything was done by the book with multiple layers of security and oversight. Dawson and I met with FBI coordinators who explained the program rules and helped us choose new identities. They gave us packets with our new names, social security numbers, employment histories, and background stories. Dawson was going to Denver with a job lined up at a tech company and an apartment already secured. I was relocating to Portland with Savannah, and they'd arranged a software engineering position for me at a mid-sized firm. We'd have limited contact through secure encrypted channels monitored by the FBI. No phone calls, no video chats, no in-person meetings except in emergencies. They explained the separation was necessary because if someone found one of us, they couldn't use that information to locate the other. We reviewed the security protocols, the emergency contact procedures, the rules about maintaining our cover identities. Agent Maddox personally oversaw every detail and made sure we understood how serious this was. She said we were getting a second chance that most people in witness protection never got, and we needed to follow every rule exactly. She'd be our primary contact and would check in monthly to make sure we were safe and adjusting to our new lives. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Seattle. Savannah and I drove through our old neighborhood one last time with FBI agents following in an unmarked car. We parked outside our house and sat there looking at the place we'd built our life together. She cried and said she'd miss her garden, her book club, the coffee shop where we had our first date. I thought about my job, my co-workers, my boss who'd watched the agents take me away that first day. Everything we'd worked for was just gone. We couldn't even tell our friends and family the truth about where we were going. The FBI had helped us craft cover stories about job transfers and new opportunities in different cities. Everyone would think we just moved away for work. We drove to Discovery Park where Dawson and I had met during the shooting and walked the trails one last time. Savannah held my hand tight and told me she was scared, but also excited to start fresh somewhere new. She said we'd been through hell together and survived, and that made us stronger as a couple. I told her I didn't deserve her, and she laughed and said I definitely didn't, but she was stuck with me anyway. We sat on a bench overlooking the water and watched the sunset. I thought about how different my life looked now compared to a few months ago when I was just a regular software engineer with a normal existence. Savannah squeezed my hand and said we'd be okay in Portland, that we'd build a new life and eventually this would all feel like a bad dream. Before we separated, Dawson and I met one final time at a secure FBI facility near the airport. Agent Maddox gave us 30 minutes alone in a conference room. We sat across from each other at the table, and neither of us knew what to say at first. Finally, Dawson thanked me for helping him expose the corruption and for not hating him despite everything he'd done. He said he knew he'd destroyed my life, and he'd carry that guilt forever. I told him I didn't hate him, and that I understood he was just trying to survive. I said family was complicated but worth fighting for, and we were brothers now, whether we planned it or not. He smiled, and it was like looking in a mirror. We exchanged our secure contact information and promised to stay in touch through the encrypted channels. Dawson said maybe someday, when things calmed down, we could meet up again properly. I told him I'd like that, and that I wanted to know how his life in Denver turned out. We stood up and hugged awkwardly, and I realized this was the first time we'd done that. Agent Maddox knocked on the door to tell us time was up. We pulled apart and looked at each other one more time. Dawson said he hoped I'd have a good life in Portland with Savannah. I told him to stay safe in Denver and to follow all the protection protocols. He promised he would, and then the FBI agents came in to take him to his transport. I watched him walk out and wondered when I'd see my brother again. 6 months passed, and Savannah and I landed in Portland with completely new names and a fresh apartment in the Pearl District. I started at a tech company doing database work, nothing flashy, just solid coding that paid the bills. We made friends with our neighbors Tom and Lisa, who thought we moved from Sacramento for my job. They invited us to game nights and we went hiking with them on weekends, and it felt weird lying about where we came from, but also kind of nice having people who didn't know about the mob or the witness protection or any of it. I caught myself checking over my shoulder a lot those first few months, scanning faces in crowds, making sure nobody was following us home. Savannah noticed and held my hand tighter when we walked downtown. Every few weeks, my secure phone buzzed with encrypted messages from Dawson in Denver. He told me about his therapy sessions, how he was working through the guilt of stealing my identity and the trauma of witnessing that murder. He sent photos of the mountains and said he was learning to rock climb, which made me smile because I'd always wanted to try that. Last Tuesday, Savannah and I sat on our apartment balcony watching the sun drop behind the buildings, painting everything orange and pink. She turned to me with this nervous smile and said she was pregnant. My brain just stopped for a second. We'd been through federal agents and crime families and losing everything we built in Seattle, and now we were sitting here talking about a baby. I pulled her close and she laughed and cried at the same time. I thought about calling Dawson right then to tell him he was going to be an uncle, and it hit me that this whole nightmare gave me a brother I never knew I had. We were both finally safe enough to actually live instead of just survive. So yeah, that's how it all went down. Nothing fancy, just another story worth sharing. Thanks for sticking around. It always feels easy talking here. Come back next time if you want to hang out again.